In the coaching and consulting world, everyone talks about success, but few talk about what it really takes to get there. I'm Kevin Holly, and this is Coaches Unplugged, where we pull back the curtain and have honest conversations with the people shaping the industry. In each episode, you'll hear how top coaches and consultants built their businesses, faced their challenges, and continue to grow, both in impact and in mindset. No fluff, no pretense, just real stories, real lessons, real talk about what it takes to build something that lasts. Today on Coaches Unplugged, we're joined by an individual. He's a communications strategist with nearly a decade of experience helping organizations navigate complex policy landscapes and shape narratives that truly move the needle. From leading media strategy at the Commonwealth Foundation to driving national campaigns across highly regulated industries, he brings deep expertise in public affairs, reputation management, and stakeholder engagement, cutting through the noise to influence perception at scale. Please help me welcome Christian Stellakis. Hi, Christian. How are you? Welcome.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks. Great to be here.
Your background obviously is very diverse. If you don't mind, feel free to share with our listeners a little bit about your background and what drew you into this field as a whole.
Currently, I work, as you said, at J Strategy. So I'm a vice president there. I handle and coordinate communication strategies across our clients and the heavily regulated industries that they operate in. And so going back a little bit, I have a wide range of experience. I worked, as you said, at the Commonwealth Foundation, where I kind of managed that nonprofit's media and public relations presence. But even further back, I really got my start cutting my teeth in politics, actually. So I helped run a few local political campaigns for congressional races, including New York 22 and New York 24, before ultimately getting the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C., where I was a research analyst at the National Republican Congressional Committee.
Definitely. So now you're up to the point where you're the vice president there. How does your role fit into the bigger picture there on a day-to-day basis?
I operate, 5 to 6 different client accounts. My goal across all of those different accounts is to figure out the individual needs that my clients needed serviced, and then work with them as well as my internal team to kind of solve their particular problems. So what that might look like is on a daily basis, I read a ton. And so I'm constantly reading the news, whether it be on the national news or our state level news across like New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and the like. I'm also creating and serving as a quality assurance check on a variety of deliverables, those being things like press releases, statements, op-eds, and the like. And then I'm working with third-party allies. So trying to figure out and trying to build coalitions around the issues that our clients care about so that they can create a united front, essentially, and show that the issues that they care about are impacting others as well.
Now, Christian, we talked to a lot of coaches and consultants. You're probably one of the very few that has a background so heavily rooted in communications and public affairs. Share with us, how do you merge the two? How do you link those two different backgrounds so well?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say that I think that the key, whether you're dealing in communications, you're dealing in public affairs, media relations, coaching, the difference is that you have to view empathy as strategy in and of itself. People are not means to an end, rather they're ends in and of themselves, and they need to be dealt with that way. I think that it really helps to have the understanding that it's your job as a communicator and as a coach to make the lives of those around you as easy and as productive as possible, and to help be their guide, to help transition them from a place that they are now to where they want to go, building the pathways that allow them to do that. And so you do that by having conversations with people, identifying where the struggles that they're experiencing are coming from, and then building a pathway that we can chart from point A to B to C all the way to D to get them to be able to overcome those challenges. And then along the way, iterating different processes so that we can, as new challenges arise, you can overcome them.
How long have you been an active coach now for?
Yeah, so I've been doing that for probably the past 5 to 6 years at this point.
Awesome. What would you say has been for our listeners who are listening, and perhaps someone who's listening has a similar background where, not necessarily a career change, but just navigating different tools, right, that they have in their arsenal to be able to assist them in their coaching and consulting. What's one thing that you would say worked extremely well for you as you transitioned 5 or 6 years ago into also coaching as well?
For me, the biggest thing is realizing that when it comes to growth, structure and process is crucial to proper development. I think that a lot of people, when they want to begin growing, whether they're a business trying to grow their revenue base or they're an individual trying to grow their career path, they want to move, and they want to move quickly, and they want to show activity and get things done. But I think that one of the things that I can kind of consistently advocate for is this idea of strategic restraint. And that's the mindset that growth decisions require discipline, and that movement, going from one to another place, movement is not momentum. And so people want to scale, right? They want to grow fast and they want to build their businesses. But what I always try to advise people to do is take a step back and get to the heart of the goal of why they want to scale. What's the underlying objective behind that? Because ultimately, in my mind, scale is not a goal and scale is not a strategy. Scale is a tactic. And so there are times where you can scale and it be a great idea. And that's something that you'll want to implement in your professional career or in your business. But it's not necessarily always the right move. And so what I always encourage people to do is take a step back, really identify the objective that they're trying to achieve, and then from there, realize that every expansion choice that you make carries with it an opportunity cost. So because you are doing something in an effort to try to grow and get bigger and more influential, you're necessarily giving up something else. And so in my experience, when you scale, oftentimes what you sacrifice is your individuality. And so what you need to be able to realize is that for some people, you can manage a certain level of scale, but for others, their key value add is that individual thing that separates them from everybody else. And necessarily, to be successful, they have to maintain that. And so in those sorts of instances, you want to approach rapid scaling with a little bit of reticence.
You said a few things there that really stood out. You said movement is not always momentum, which I couldn't agree more. A lot of people think that just because they're busy that they're going somewhere, right? And we know that's not always the case. It's what are you busy doing, right? Like what's taking your time? What is keeping you on the run, on the go constantly? And is it moving you closer to your goals, right? Just because you're busy and have 12 meetings a day, working 7 days a week, where is that leading you? So and then you also mentioned that when you're coaching someone, it's not just about basically where they are, but obviously there's so many different factors that play into just the whole strategy of scaling. And you talked about scaling not being a goal. It's not a strategy. It's a tactic is what you said. So, and that's very interesting because a lot of people, especially in the coaching and consulting industry, they focus so heavily on scaling. And I want to grow. I want to expand. I want to do this. I want to do that. And one of the questions is, well, why do you want to do that? Where is that actually going to get you to where you want to be, right? Scaling is not, as you mentioned, it's not the goal. It's a tactic to get to the goal. We spoke a little bit before this episode, and you mentioned that you have a couple different things out in your private life that also help you in your professional life. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but if you don't mind sharing with our audience just a little bit about what helps you be able to uh, evaluate and coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people don't realize, I think that my career path has been a little bit different from a lot of other folks in this industry, specifically because before I was a communications professional, I was actually a professional poker player, which I think for me really colors and changes the way that I see everything in the world of communications and coaching. Specifically because there are so many issues relating to things like risk and psychology and decision making that are lessons that are hard learned at the poker table, that a lot of people who don't have that experience, having played poker for thousands upon thousands of hours and played with some pretty serious competition at relatively substantial stakes, a lot of people don't have those kind of hard learned lessons that come from being able to manage risk and make decisions under extreme amounts of pressure. And so, kind of getting back to that idea about strategic restraint, one of the reasons why I bring that up is because there's this idea that comes out of poker. And it's typically the idea that more volume does not necessarily equal more profit. And so when professional poker players are playing, typically what they'll try to do, the online guys, is they'll try to do something called multi-tabling. So having up several different tables at the same time with the goal of trying to get in as many hands as they can against the competition. And there's that's a good thing in many cases if you can sustain it. The problem is a lot of the time people's goal is to increase the amount of volume that they're getting, increasing the amount of hands that they're seeing, but that is actually degrading the quality of their play because they can't make those individual decisions and reads and be able to look at the betting tells of their opponent to be able to exploit them. And so it's those kind of lessons that say, okay, you can scale to a certain degree, but after a while, there's going to be a factor that degrades your performance. And you need to be aware of that and take that into consideration before you go ahead and make any of these sorts of decisions.
For sure, for sure. So, by the way, do you still play poker yourself now, or is it
I do.
you do?
Nowadays, though, because I'm not playing professionally, I just get to go and enjoy the game because I'm a competitor at heart. So I love it regardless, the stakes notwithstanding. So now I get to go, relax, have fun, and try to beat up on the guys that I once was, those for-profit players.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Takes all the stress and the anxiety away from it all, and you can just enjoy it and be in the moment. That's awesome.
When your paycheck doesn't ride on the turn of a card, it certainly allows you to relax a little bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned a couple different challenges, right? Which kind of takes me into our next phase, which we're talking about rethinking scaling operations. And again, you hit it right on the head where, scale is relative, right? It's relative and it's not a one size fits all.
Mm.
What are some of the challenges that you've seen with today's current market trends and things of such? What are some of the challenges that coaches and consultants are facing right now, today in 2026?
I think there's a strong desire to rely on AI, specifically when it comes to scale. I think that a lot of businesses are chasing what they consider to be the panacea of AI, thinking that the tools that are being created and are being put out there, it seems like there's a new one every day, can solve all of their business problems if only they embrace it to the fullest extent. And I think that there's absolutely a place for AI, whether it be in communications or business operations, and the clients and the folks that I coach on a daily basis. I encourage them to utilize AI. But I will say the concern is that AI should never replace the one-to-one human connection. And I think that that is the danger of relying too much on AI, is that you begin to atrophy the skills that you would otherwise need to be successful. And so there's actually a similar thing that happens, getting back to the poker playing experience, which, for me, a lot of my experience goes back to. When a lot of pros try to utilize game theory optimal, which is basically, you think about chess and how computers play chess, it's essentially the same thing that poker's trying to do with computer models, is model out the theoretically optimal way to play. Now, a lot of professional players, I think to their detriment, study GTO extensively to try to learn exactly what to do in every single situation. The problem that comes up as a result of that is that when they're finally placed in a situation where they didn't prep for, where the chart that they studied doesn't have a solution for, all of a sudden they're lost and they're left guessing because they didn't build those soft skills that allow them to read and understand the situation that they're in and then be able to adapt based on the tells of your opponent, the timing that they're taking, their betting patterns, things like that. They're more focused on finding the theoretically optimal solution and they're missing the forest for the trees. And so what I always recommend is folks take a step back, realize that yes, AI can be a performance multiplier. It can be a force multiplier. But at the same time, you need to be able to use AI effectively alongside the skills that you've already cultivated. And it should never be replacing the skills that you have. It should be working alongside them to elevate your performance rather than replace it.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. I think the AI boom that we're seeing right before our eyes right now, in a lot of ways, parallels the internet boom from 25, 30 years ago, right? Where, we had this big new thing, right? That's taken over the world. And, you have your sector of people they're definitely afraid of it and not sure what it's going to do. And, I remember, Y2K when, people were still afraid of computers and they weren't sure what was going to happen on January 1st, 2000. They thought the world would shut down and things like that. And,
Yeah.
we laugh now. It was only 26 years ago, right? When all that was taking place. And, we have so much, wisdom now. History repeats itself. And, we see it now with AI and, there's millions upon millions of people right now who are afraid of losing their job and they're afraid of AI taking their careers and their livelihoods from them. And you hit it right on the head. There's certainly an array of industries where there will always be a need for human oversight at the very least. And we talk to many coaches and consultants, who are on varying sides of the table when it comes to AI. But at the same time, this is one of the industries that people have very little to worry about as far as this or AI replacing what it is that coaches do, right? AI can't read emotions, right? They can't talk to someone and read the room and look at it from an objective viewpoint, as opposed to just spitting out, just cookie cutter answers, things like that. That's totally different. But what many people have found is they can use AI as a tool, right? We talked about tools and strategies, right? And methodology, right? It's, AI is not the goal. It's a tactic, right? If you don't mind sharing with our audience, how do you use AI on a day-to-day basis currently to stay ahead of the trend and to, adapt to the different shifts in the market right now?
Yeah, I think that one of the best ways of using AI is not to generate content for you, but it's to serve as a partner in stress testing your own reasoning. And so this comes up a lot when I work with clients, specifically relating to things like crisis comms, where they're dealing with an issue or we need to prepare them for a potential contingency, a problem that might come up, right? One of the things that I'll use AI for is to help brainstorm problems that may come up for a business like that, or an individual who's struggling or trying to grow their business. Like, what are the challenges that I'm not thinking of? And then once I kind of have that listed out, what I do is I'll develop strategies that I think would be best as a response. Then I'll work with AI to ask it, stress test these ideas for me. Identify where I'm having cognitive biases, where my emotions are getting in the way of my decision making, or where I'm not seeing the full picture. Test my assumptions to see where I'm assuming things that I really shouldn't be and missing things as a result. And I think that when you give it those sorts of prompts, it will push back on your reasoning rather than just agree with everything that you say. Because one of the chief dangers of using AI and just like asking it, is this good? Is that its goal is to ultimately to make you happy, and it wants to give you the answer that you want to hear. And so it has that kind of natural inclination, that bias towards appeasement rather than truth. So you need to be careful when you're prompting the AI to specifically encourage it to test your assumptions, push back on your logic and reasoning, and identify your weak points. And then you can work with it to fill those gaps, your unique individual expression and your capabilities.
Awesome. So it sounds like essentially what you're saying is that people and professionals in our industry, they just need to be a little bit better educated on how to effectively use AI to their advantage.
That's right. I mean, AI is, like you said, at the end of the day, it's a tool and it needs a person to be able to operate it effectively. And it's only going to be as good as the operator. It's an incredible supercomputer in your pocket. It can do amazing things, or it can lead you completely astray and get you to believe completely wrong information and wonky theories. And whichever outcome that you get will totally be determined by the inputs that you provided. And so you really need to be careful what you are feeding into the knowledge machine, because what it'll spit back out to you will flow from that.
Christian, I spoke with another individual not too long ago, and they spoke a little bit about the fact that 30 years ago, this industry was nowhere near what it is today, right? When you talked about coaching back in 1995, people assumed that you meant your kid's soccer game, right? So relatively, this industry is newer, right? In comparison to a lot of other fields, right? What are some of the misconceptions that you think people have about this industry, the coaching and consulting space?
I think one of the key misconceptions that I see all the time is that folks in this industry specifically will focus on results. They'll be fixated on results, I think oftentimes to their detriment. In poker, we have this maxim that we'll say to ourselves all the time, and it's don't be results oriented, be process oriented. And I think it's that mentality that so many people have a natural revulsion against. Naturally, they want the results to flow from their activities. And I think that that's a completely reasonable perspective to have. But when you're, working in a field like poker specifically, there's a level of uncertainty that comes with every decision that you make. You might make the right decision and you might be punished for it. Maybe you're punished for it 3, 4, 5 times in a row. But those results don't dictate the quality of the decision that you made. What dictates the quality of your decision is your process. So what you need to be able to do is recognize that short-term fluctuations in your performance is not indicative of the strength or weakness of your overall strategy. So in my mind, process is king. Bad players can have winning nights and good players can get absolutely crushed because there's a level of uncertainty, there's a level of chance, and it's the same thing in life. You need to be able to kind of have that mentality to be able to separate individual results from the process. Now, when you have a good process, results will eventually come. But I think people get too fixated on the short term and will end up changing a good strategy or diverting from it because they don't see the results immediately coming, immediately following. And it's okay to take a step back, take a deep breath, and realize that everything's going to be all right.
For sure. So a big part of success is giving yourself enough time to see the results. Like you mentioned, sometimes people have a tendency to, either stop too soon or they don't do the right thing long enough to see the results that they're looking for, and they quickly pivot to something else. They're just bouncing from one thing to the next just because they don't have a clear direction and a clear plan in place to, again, manage the risk that obviously poker teaches you to do so very well.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that results will tell you what happened, but process tells you what's going to happen next. And kind of keeping that in mind and realizing that when the results aren't going your way, you will have a desire to make changes because it's that feeling that you have to do something. It's the desire, oftentimes in poker specifically, uh, you'll find that the best time to catch your opponent making a mistake is right after they've had a negative outcome. So right after they lost a big pot, they'll be much more likely to bluff. And the reason for that is because they had a strategy, but they had a negative result. And now it's the desperation that comes in and it clouds their judgment and it makes them want to chase after those losses and get it back as quickly as possible. But you have to realize when you're sticking to a good strategy, the results are going to come in. There's going to be ups and there's going to be downs, but it's kind of like the stock market. On any individual day, you're going to look and the stocks might be up and the stocks might be down. But then you zoom out and you look at a year, maybe 5 years, maybe 15 years across that line. And what you see is a general trend upwards because the processes behind it are sound. And you should kind of have that same mentality when working in your own life and the decisions that you make.
Christian, what's the next big goal for you?
I'm always trying to sharpen my skills and become a better communicator, a better coach, better poker player. And so I'm always seeking to identify the next trends that I can stay up to date on, the next tools that I can utilize effectively, and then figure out ways that I can take that and bring that to the people that I serve, the clients that I serve, to offer that added value. New people who hear what I have to say, like what I have to say, and want to hear more about it, or want to hear my perspective on perhaps their issue, feel free to contact me, get in touch with me, and I'm happy to hear you out, have a conversation with you, and figure out where we can go from there.
Awesome. Do you have any platforms where our listeners can connect with you and keep up to date with your stellakis insights?
Yeah, so I would recommend people follow me on LinkedIn. That's simply linkedin.com/Christian-Stellakis. You can find me on jstrategiesinc.com, or you can email me at cstellakis@jstrategiesinc.com.
Awesome. And just to wrap things up here, we talked a lot about your background and your personal experiences that have helped shape you into becoming the industry leader that you are today with J Strategies, and also in your coaching. What is something that you can leave our audience with? Maybe they just started their own coaching company, or maybe there's someone who's listening who's been doing this for 20, 25 years and they've ran into one of life's many challenges, right? And they're at a crossroads now where they're not sure how to navigate it. One piece of advice that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
Speaking about scaling, I would say that scaling only works if your edge can survive the scale. And I would say that process is king. And when it comes to process, it's essential to be disciplined because discipline scales better than impulsiveness. And if you can hammer out your discipline, figure out the systems and the processes that work best for you, and then operate within those to scale, you'll be successful in the long term.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Christian. That was very thought-provoking. A lot of things you said, I think, will really resonate with a lot of the people that are listening in today. And thank you so much for taking the time to divulge so much of your expertise and wisdom for our audience today. And to our audience, thank you all for listening as well, and for being a part of a conversation that's literally redefining what it means to grow, lead, and create impact. If today's episode resonated, please share it, follow along, and keep the energy moving forward, because the future of coaching and consulting isn't written by chance. It's written by those willing to evolve. I'm Kevan Holly, and until next time, keep building something extraordinary.